Hey everybody, welcome to the Phillies Talk Podcast presented by Team Toyota. I'm Corey Seidman, he's Jim Salisbury, and we're coming to you a day early this week because of the big news of JT Realmuto returning to the Phillies on a 5-year contract worth $115.5 million. So, Jim, JT Realmuto, he gets his wish of becoming the highest paid catcher ever on an annual basis, and the Phillies bring back one of the most important players in baseball. It took a long time to get here. But, man, did this change really the complexion of their offseason.
Yeah, they bring back a very popular player, very productive player. You can see a batting order and a lineup coming together. Still need to address shortstop. But you're right, it did take a long time. These things always take a long time whenever you're talking about upper-tier free agents. We saw it all over baseball this winter. And, I think the Phillies made a good deal in this. Realmuto was looking not only to set records, he was looking to blow the roof off the catching market, salaries for catchers now and down the road. When they originally started talking in the spring, his reps came in, looking for average annual values of like $30 million, $200+ million package over 7 years. You can do the math on that. Now, I know whenever there's a negotiation, one side starts high, one side works low, and you work toward the middle. But he had some very, very big expectations, and the Phillies ended up getting him for, $85, $90 million less than he was originally seeking when negotiations still started. And they got him on a 5-year deal, play at 30 this year. I see no reason he can't catch at age 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. So I think the term is good. I think the AAV is fair because I do think he is the best catcher in baseball. Joe Mauer previously had the highest AAV for catchers at $23 million. Realmuto sets his record, right? He is $23.1 million on the AAV. He is more than Mauer. Mauer was an extension. Posey was an extension. So if you look at sheer free agent contracts for catchers, it's the largest ahead of Brian McCann when he was with the Yankees by like 35%. So JT, he did set a record. That said, I think the Phillies still made a good deal. And look at it this way. In 2010, Joe Mauer signed that extension with Minnesota that paid him the $23 million AAV. It was like a $184 million extension. And he got that $23 million AAV as the best catcher in baseball more than a decade ago. So only in a decade has the AAV for the top catcher in baseball, over a decade, it's only gone up by $100,000. You know what? Kind of tip my hat to the Phillies on that one.
Well, a couple reactions to that. You see JT's point about it being unfair that the catcher market hasn't been progressing in a linear way with other positions. It is crazy that a decade later that the AAV is only rising by that small amount. The other thing about Joe Mauer's deal, by year 4 of that deal, he was exclusively a first baseman. So, right. Your point about it being a 5-year deal and only carrying JT through his age 34 season, yeah, he should be able to catch a majority of that deal. Whereas if they had to go 7 years, $200 million, is he catching more than half of that contract? So the Phillies did, seem to get the deal that they wanted. It's just kind of interesting that, where things were a couple years ago, where they are now. Matt Klentak kind of looks good right now, right? For not jumping on things a little earlier than they needed to be. And if it probably would have taken the Phillies significantly more money to get a deal done with JT 6 months ago, a year ago, right?
Yes. And then the pandemic hit. And look, that was a huge game changer. And ultimately, this deal, the credit goes to ownership, right? They're the ones writing this massive paycheck. Dave Dombrowski came in and got the ball over the finish line. But you're right. Matt Klentak back in June made a comment when the moratorium on negotiations was lifted. He made a comment that the landscape has changed and we're going to have to wait this thing out and see what happens. He took a lot of heat in this town for that comment. But ultimately, the landscape did change. The Phillies waited it out, and they got their man. So I agree with you, Matt Klentak. I think he deserves a tip of the cap on that. Obviously, ownership got this done. Dave Dombrowski got it done. But it takes a village, it takes a team. And Matt Klentak, who was there in the beginnings of these negotiations, he basically was right. The landscape had changed, and ultimately it benefited the Phillies.
So the Phillies have now spent more money so far this offseason than every team in baseball except for the Blue Jays. That could change. If the Mets sign Trevor Bauer, for example, that would change significantly. But this is a bunch of off seasons now in a row that the Phillies have given out these huge contracts. I think it's something like $1 billion over the last 3 off seasons. I mean,
well, it was. I've done the math several times previous to this winter. So the previous 3 off seasons, it was like $708 million of commitments and free agent commitments. What are they at this winter?
So now you're at about $122 million just with JT and Archie Bradley.
So you're well over $800 million the last 4 years in free agent commitments. They continue to. They're a big market team that continues to act like a big market team. So
yeah, and now they need to make the playoffs. Yeah, now they need to make the playoffs. I mean, this is right. This is a lot of spending.
That's what makes you want to take this head and pound it against that wall. I mean, that's why they blew up the front office. They've had ample resources to get something done here, and they haven't gotten anything done. That's why Dave Dombrowski is here. But coming into this offseason, there was talk, and revenues were down all over the game, and teams all over the game have done this. They've peeled back their payrolls, right? They've reduced their payrolls. They've retrenched. Some dramatically have sold off talent. The Phillies talked about they were pretty open in the fact that they were going to have to scale back the payroll some, but it ain't getting scaled back that much. Not getting scaled back that much. And JT is here, good pickup in Archie Bradley. And, they're still going to have to add a shortstop here and maybe even some more pitching help. I'm not saying they're by far the team to beat in the division, but I still think this can be an interesting team. And this winter is going to turn out much better than we all anticipated, because it really kind of looked gloomy back there when they started kind of, setting out the blueprint for the offseason back in maybe October.
Yeah, I mean, part of me, just the Philadelphian in me, almost wonders what the reaction would have been if Realmuto did end up with the Mets. Just God, the city would have just freaked out. But so the payroll now is at about $180 million. I laid out the situation over at NBC Sports Philadelphia.com, kind of an estimated look at where it is. The Phillies are at about $179.5 million in 2021 payroll. The number that matters for JT toward the 2021 payroll is the $23.1 million, the AAV, even though he's not making $23.1 million in 2021. Isn't that correct?
In 2021, his salary is $20 million, but $10 million is deferred. And that's basically kind of an acknowledgement that, the game has lost revenues here with the pandemic, and there's the potential for more lost revenues. I'd say a likelihood for more lost revenues here in 2021. So he agreed to defer $10 million. When you look at the whole 115, it's not that much. But it's not really a long-term deferral, in my opinion. He's going to get $5 million in what would be year 6 and year 7. So he's going to get that money in this decade. It's not a real long-term deferral. To me, it represents two sides that worked together on getting something done. So it's not as much money deferred as the Mookie Betts deal, which has a substantial amount deferred, and that affects the present-day value. But don't ask me to explain that, because we've established many times on the old pod that I am no economist.
Okay, so the Phillies are at $180 million. And the 2021 luxury tax threshold is $210 million. Last season, the Phillies were right under that, right, Jim?
Yes, they were like 207 and change, so they finished right under that luxury tax, yes.
So now there's wiggle room beneath where they were last year, and the Phillies still need a shortstop. They still need more pitching, both in the bullpen and, quite frankly, rotation depth. I know they signed Ivan Nova the same day that they agreed to this deal with JT Realmuto. And that now gives the Phillies, I guess, 6 guys capable of starting games in 2021. There are 5 rotation guys plus Ivan Nova on this minor league deal. But shortstop and bullpen and starting pitching help. Let's start with shortstop. you had reported that the Phillies and Andrelton Simmons, that was their top target after learning that he was willing to take a short-term deal. But then Simmons came off the board the same day as JT.
Right. Well, I think Didi Gregorius was initially, a couple weeks ago, their top target. They had some talks and there was some traction for an agreement, and that kind of fell apart or started to crumble at his insistence on a longer-term deal than I guess the Phillies were comfortable with. And the Phillies learned that Simmons, who they had been keeping in touch with at the same time, and they were also keeping in touch with other shortstops, but they had learned Simmons would take a one-year deal. He became the focus. Ultimately, he goes to Minnesota getting $10.5 million. So logic dictates they were outbid on a one-year contract. So that would seem to indicate they'd have to circle back to Didi Gregorius. The landing spots are disappearing. The pool of shortstops is disappearing. Whether or not that makes Didi more open to a contract of a shorter term, and I'm not sure if it's 1 or 2 or 1 and an option. Whether or not that makes him open to something like that on a return to the Phillies, I think they would like to see that happen. And if it doesn't happen, they're going to have to explore the trade market because there were quite a few shortstops out there this winter. Simeon, Freddie Galvis, Simmons, Didi. Guys I would call everyday guys, but, 3 of them signed the other day, and 3 of them signed one-year deals. So market's really leaning toward one-year deals. We'll see if that helps the Phillies get Didi back on a deal that agrees with them. Otherwise, they're going to have to pursue something in a trade because, it's clear they don't want to play Segura at shortstop. They could, but it's clear that there's a reluctance there. I would guess if he's not moved, and he was doing $30 million over 2 years, it's tough to move him. I would guess he'd play second, Kingery super utility, maybe even get a chance to compete for the center field job. And they would have to look for a shortstop, but there's not a lot out there. You and I talked about Ahmed Rosario a couple days ago after Cesar Hernandez re-signed with the Indians to play second base. You're like, wow, the Indians now have a bunch of middle infielders, Rosario and Jimenez, the 2 guys they got from the Mets in the Lindor deal. So who's what? Would that make Rosario available? I'm sure they would listen. Really good athlete, still quite young, I think 25 years old, but inconsistent defensively, doesn't really get on base, but there's a lot of tools there. He's probably maybe not a finished product. Maybe you can get something out of him, but they're not going to give him away. He's got control for 3 years, 3 years of contractual control remaining. Maybe the Phillies are looking for more defensively there. I don't know. I know they would like to put a good defender there because you look at Nola Wheeler and Zach Eflin, they led a rotation last year, had a 49% ground ball rate. So you need somebody to catch the ball at shortstop. Not sure where they're going to go if they don't get Didi. Cincinnati's in on Didi. I think they have a real reluctance to go more than 1 year. I don't know if they can write the biggest check either. So I still think maybe there's a path back here for Didi Gregorius. If not, the name on the trade market that, we all know and we all see out there and you all scratch your head and wonder about is Trevor Story, right?
Wow. What a player. I love Trevor Story.
What a player, yeah.
He's pretty underrated. I think a lot of people just think, Colorado puts up big offensive numbers, but he does it all. He's a great defender, very good base runner.
What about this ballpark, too? This ballpark, it's like coming to Colorado East. Yeah. Colorado without the mountains.
It would probably take way too much. Why wouldn't the Rockies ask for the Phillies, like 2 of their top 3 prospects, even those stories of a looming free agent? Looking at the rest of the landscape, though, Didi's one of 3 free agent shortstops left. The other guys you're looking at, Eric Sogard, who's a 35-year-old utility man. He's not a shortstop. You have Jonathan VR, who shortstop is not his best position. Danny Santana, who's played a little shortstop, but he's mostly a utility guy. Beyond that, I'm looking at trade candidates who are lesser names than a Story. Maybe Nico Goodrum of the Tigers, but he doesn't really hit. There's Adalberto Mondesi in Kansas City, who I like a lot, but again, exciting young player who's cost control. He's going to cost a lot in a trade. I know that you mentioned the importance of defense here, and I agree. Andrelton Simmons would have been pretty clutch to have behind these ground ball pitchers. However, if there's no designated hitter in the National League this season, and the Phillies do not bring Didi Gregorius back, they could be looking at a 6, 7, 8, 9 of Gene Segura, the center fielder who's like Scott Kingery or Adam Hazley or Roman Quinn, then a light-hitting shortstop, and then the pitcher. That's a pretty weak 6, 7, 8, 9, as good as the top 5 is.
Yeah, I agree. None of those names really excite me that you just rattled off. I'd almost rather play play Segura there and use some of that money to maybe fortify the bullpen more or get another pitcher. Or there's other ways to improve your team. But Didi, I think, comes in and he brings a lot of intangible impact, in my opinion. Very good in the clubhouse. I've heard such good things about him down in that room. And I saw it last year in spring training. I think he comes in and plays a solid, sound defense. I don't think it's a spectacular defense. But, he gives you left side pop. I think that can be very valuable. I still like the idea of him on a short-term deal. I still wonder what Freddie Galvis would have looked like. He got $1.5 million, right? And, a lot of different opinions on Freddie. Either like him or you don't like him. But I think he would have come in and really played good defense, catch the ball on a short-term deal for not a lot of money, and then could have taken some of that money and really sunk it into the bullpen. Darren O'Day went to the Yankees on a very reasonable deal, like a couple $1 million. There's still other good relievers out there. So what you might pay Didi, you could have spread it out maybe over 4 guys. It's something fun to kick around in debate. But that said, if they can go out and get Didi on a deal that works for them, bring it on.
Yeah, I just wonder, like you said, who else could beat a Phillies offer for Didi? The Reds have cut costs this offseason. And then look at the teams that still need a shortstop. Like the Oakland A's just lost Marcus Semien, who signed with the Blue Jays. Are the A's going to go out and sign Didi to a 3-year deal? That's not their track record of spending. And then just, you run through the other teams in your head that have spent this offseason. They all have shortstops. So, it just seems like, again, as it was with JT, it seems like this market kind of came back to the Phillies. The flip side is that they're going to be in rough shape if they don't bring Didi back, as you just said, because then they would be left with a light-hitting shortstop most likely, in addition to having missed out on some of those Darren O'Day types.
Yeah. So, it feels like it's coming to a head too. I would think with the shortstop market clearing up so much this week that we could hear something on Didi in the short term. I think he liked it here. I think he likes playing for Joe Girardi. Maybe that'll work in the Phillies' favor. So we'll keep an eye on it. But it's a significant hole. Middle of the diamond is always so important, And they brought back JT at a big place in the middle of the diamond. Center field's still a head scratcher. They have admitted that they're considering bringing Odubel Herrera to camp. That'll be interesting if they do. I don't think you bring him into camp for show. I think you bring him into camp to compete. Really they're looking at the middle of that diamond, and, of course, the bump in the middle of the diamond is the most important place on the field. Still, I'm sure they're going to take a couple flyers on people in the bullpen and or the rotation here as the final weeks to spring training tick down.
Jim, did it surprise you that nobody was elected to the Hall of Fame this year? It's only the 4th time this has happened since 1960, first time since 2013.
No, it didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise me. It sort of had been trending that way because later on in the process, as you have the public votes revealed and then the private votes are kind of sit on. Usually the projections go down when those private votes come out. So, no, it didn't surprise me. And what it does is, we didn't have an induction this year for Jeter, Larry Walker, Ted Simmons, David Montgomery, the great Phillies president who's going to receive the Buck O'Neil Award, Marvin Miller. So those guys will take center stage in July. Hopefully there will be an in-person ceremony, induction, I should say. But it didn't surprise me. And next year, fascinating with Schilling and Bonds and Clemens all in their final year on the ballot. So who knows how it's going to shake out. It's become a debate of more than baseball. It's become a debate of morality and frankly, I'm a little uncomfortable with it all. So, they're all great players. All those guys, anybody who makes it on the Hall of Fame ballot, who goes through that initial vetting, was a pretty damn good player. Even Shane Victorino, who was on the ballot for the first time this year, fell off the ballot, didn't get any votes. He made it on the Hall of Fame ballot. That means something. That would mean something. So hats off to everybody who was on the ballot.
Well, two former Phillies will be on next year's ballot, and Jimmy Rollins and Ryan Howard. They'll be first-time eligible. Curt Schilling actually asked to have his name removed from the ballot next year. It would be his 10th and final year of eligibility. He's just so fed up with the process and with sports writers in general. So Scott Rowland was the biggest gainer. He gained, I think, 18%, got up to 53%. You need 75% for election, for induction. So Rowland is trending that way. I mean, do you see him as a Hall of Famer? Do you think he could inevitably get in? Yeah,
I think he's on a good track to get in. With the jumps he's making, he's over 50% now. And I don't have the data, but usually guys that get over 50% at some point this early in their sort of their ballot life get there. And he was a great player. I watched him here in Philadelphia. I mean, big, strong kid, but threw his body around like an acrobat at third base. Could really bring it across the diamond with strong arm, great hands, great defender. Had some real big years at the plate. Won a World Series, won a ton of Gold Gloves. I can see why he's getting a lot of support. I think, and on top of it, a real quality guy. Sometimes gets a bad rap in Philadelphia. It's always made me scratch my head a little bit, having covered his entire time here in Philadelphia. He had really one frustration in that the Phillies, he didn't think they were doing everything they could to win, and he just wanted to play on a winning team. And it coincided his time here with the latter days of the vet and a rebuild, and when the organizational priority was getting a stadium that would provide the revenues to bring the team into the future. And he just wanted the team to spend more money and do more things, and eventually they did, and he just missed it, right? He had moved on. Imagine if he had been part of that. He would have been the veteran sage on that 07, 08, 09, right? As they were coming together. And that was such a great infield. Now you put him at third base.
Thinking about like Utley at second, Rollins at short, Rowland at third. I mean, just the defensive ability beyond everything else. Hey, one thing that I was thinking, though, when I looked at these results, and I see the groundswell for Rowland to make it, is like Andrew Jones is in such a similar situation. Premium defensive player at a premium defensive position. I mean, as good of a third baseman as Rowland was, wouldn't you say that Jones was like his equal in center field or something close to it?
Only giving the eye test here, yes. I mean, I saw him run down balls for years, and he was so smooth and so gifted. There were baseball men that I really trusted, scouts over the years. I remember talking to one in particular, guy who played in the big leagues for a long time, scouted for the Phillies briefly, scouted for a number of other teams in a long and pretty distinguished career. And he said Andrew Jones was the best defender in center field he had ever seen. So,
wow.
The Hall of Fame is for, transcendent talents, in my opinion. It's a really high bar. I mean, 75% is a high bar in any election, right? And it should be a high bar. So, like I said, just get that 50% is a huge accomplishment. Yeah. So I think Scotty Rowland might be on his way. Might be on his way. So, and Billy Wagner made a little bit of a jump as well. I mean, he was a great one. He was a fearless guy. Always took the ball, threw strikes, rung up people, went after tough pockets of lineups deep in the game. So, he might be trending in the right direction as well. It'll be fascinating to see what happens here in coming winters.
I think what really helped Billy Wagner was his appearance on the Phillies Talk Podcast.
I think it could have. I really do. He was great talking to him back, what was it, May? I think we talked to him in April or May. He was awesome. He's so entertaining, such a fun guy, and such a real great story of, to me, of what being a competitor and what sports is all about. This is a kid who, as a little guy, I think he was 5 or 8 or 9 years old, he broke his right arm. He's a natural right-hander. He broke his right arm, but he continued to want to throw footballs and baseballs, so he started throwing left-handed. And, oh, by the way, became the hardest throwing left-hander on the planet at one point in time. And he literally was the hardest throwing left-hander on the planet at one stage of his life. And he kind of had that short arm, boom, quick short arm, chop delivery, almost like he was throwing a football. And that's because he started throwing football left-handed after he broke his arm playing football, broke his right arm. And, I mean, he eats right-handed, he writes right-handed, but he throws a baseball and a football left-handed. And a remarkable story to get to the big leagues. Kind of reminds me of, I think I've told you this story before. I'm getting on one of my famous tangents. I apologize. But Milt Thompson, who played on the 93 Phillies, former Phillies hitting coach, played with the Braves, the Cardinals, the Phillies, had a really excellent career. Great guy. He grew up near Washington, D.C., and Jackie Robinson was his favorite player, and he always wanted to be a second baseman like Jackie Robinson. So he signs up for Little League, and he was left-handed, so the coach sticks him in outfield, right, because he's left-handed. And he says, I want to play second base. And the coach says, well, left-handers, they really don't play second base. And so he went home and he told his father, and his father said, how bad do you want it? How bad do you want to play second base? Well, they went out in the yard that night and started throwing right-handed, and they did it for 2 or 3 years. And he ends up playing second base in college, teaches himself to throw right-handed, natural lefty, teaches himself to throw right-handed, ends up playing second base in college, gets drafted, mostly on the strength of his bat, and ends up in the outfield at that point in his life, which he was fine with. He was going to the big leagues. But he taught himself to throw right-handed so he could play second base like Jackie Robinson. I thought that was a pretty neat story.
You never know where the Phillies Talk Podcast is going to take you. If you're interested in listening to that Billy Wagner interview that we were referencing, you can check it out back in the archives. It was really good stuff. It was Jim with 2 closers. It was Ricky Bowe and Billy Wagner, so that was a fun conversation. That's going to do it for today. He's Jim. I'm Corey. Thanks for listening. Talk to you early next week.